you a little excerpt from an interview that appeared in a magazine with Josef. The question is, if you could give the Prime Minister one piece of advice, what would it be? And Josef answers, science is on the verge of revolutionizing life, culture, and economies. Every effort should be made to nurture universities and research. All parts of science must be supported, not just the ones that might become products. That's Josef Penninger.
So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's very embarrassing. I actually lost my button. It's never happened to me before. So if I touch myself here, it's not because of the sex movie as well. So today I heard a lot about, as you heard yesterday, so we Austrians are a little funny, and we talk a little funny, as you know from my cousin Arnold. And of course I live here in Canada and I'm married to a Chinese, and that's our contribution to Canadian society. And I think that's all I really want to say, because you're much more knowledgeable on the State of Union and other things. So we like it here. Last night, of course, my kid couldn't sleep until 2. So I didn't know what to talk about. So I'm a genetic engineer, and I use this word on purpose, like Stalin used to engineer the human soul. So we are engineering life at the moment. So I looked through this little bag of roots we got, and so there was this little ticket for painting, and I thought maybe I'll talk to you about paintings, so my real passion of life. And so this is actually a painting in the exhibition, in the one way which you can go. And it's an old painting from a Dutch guy, and it's called Father Time is Rescuing Truth. So Truth is, of course, a naked woman, and Father Time is saving her from one who is jealousy, and one which is stupidity. And the third one, which you cannot sit on, is a little guy who is heresy. And I think what's an important point is whatever we talk about, time at the end of it will reveal the truth. And so the next painting I would like to show you is my favorite. It's Jan Vermeer, his daughter. And I really like it, and it speaks for itself. And that's another guy that's early political satire, Archimboldo. So he painted a bishop at that time, or probably somebody who was supporting the Emperor Rudolf II, and you can see he really painted him as a chicken face. And of course, doing this in 1650, this was real guts, because if you did this, everybody recognized the bishop immediately, and of course, if you were not careful, you ended up on the stakes. But Archimboldo also did these beautiful paintings, and these are, so it's summer. And I think why I like Archimboldo is because he realized that the little pieces in a country, little pieces in a piece of architecture, and little pieces of science, if you can put them all together, you actually create a beautiful organism. So this is what it takes to create life and to see beyond the things we're studying at the moment. So what I would like to talk to you about is what we're doing. So we're genetic engineers. You all have heard the human genome is sequenced. So we have now the blueprint, the book of life for plants, for animals, for humans. So what do we do with this? And in essence, what this book of life tells you, so you cannot see this, but it's fairly boring. It doesn't mean nothing to me either. So the book of life is basically an accumulation of little words, an A and a T and a G and a C. And if you put them together, you get a big nose or a little nose, or you become a mouse, or you become a frog, or whatever you want to be in your life, or a plant. And, and of course, somebody compared sequencing the human genome. It's a major breakthrough for humankind, of course. But somebody called it shooting somebody to the moon. So it's very cheap. It's not very intellectual. So what's the real trick is, and what's expensive is, actually get the people you shoot to the moon back alive. And so this is what we're doing, and which is called a post-genomic era. So we're recreating life and figuring out what this piece of sequence actually means. Because you have this book, it's millions of pages, and you're reading through it, it's completely unreadable. And depending which pieces you put together, how you shuffle these pieces, you get a completely different outcome. Somebody gets cancer, somebody gets heart disease, somebody lives to be 120 years old. So I will tell you about this gene we hit on, and we wanted to figure out what it's doing. And of course, scientific endeavor nowadays doing genetic research, so we're not in our glass tower, so we're not just dreaming up things. So we're actually working in teams. And the other thing why I'm showing this is because when we started doing this, we couldn't get any funding, so much about innovation from people who pay science in Canada. And so we're actually selling this as a postcard. And so I have it here, so if you want it, so to support our research. This was a joke. So, but actually what happened is, so we are working at the Amgen Institute, and so who saved us was a US company because they were willing to give us $10 million a year to do our little tricks. And what we do is the following: we're changing life. So we have stem cells. We started this 11, 12 years ago. So you have the cells. Out of the cells, you can create a whole organism. And out of this single cell we are growing, you can now punch out the gene number 20,212 completely selectively. And out of the single cell, you can create a completely new organism. So we can do this. I can just take a hair of you, try to reclone you. So we started this 12 years ago. And of course, you all have heard about Dolly and that we're able now to clone humans, that we are kind of changing life. And I think in science, we have never been able in the whole history of science to change life before it ever happened. And of course, this is a major revolution in science, and I think it will change morals, it will change religions, and it will change how we see ourselves. So this is actually a little mouse, this little guy, with his brother, so the brother is above, and the little guy is the one where we changed this gene I showed you before. And so these guys are little. When they grow older, their heads are changing, they look like hamsters or beavers maybe. So, and why are they little? And they have also no teeth. And why they're little is the following: because their bones are completely solid. So these guys have not a single cell which eats the bone away. And so these are the cells which are completely lacking. And this cell is called the osteoclast. And this is a very special thing, because what this thing is doing, it sits in our bones and eats your bone away. So you might think our bones are set for life, but as a matter of fact, 10% of all our bone is remodeled every year. It's completely replaced. Every 10 years, our bones are completely renewed. And of course, there are many diseases of bone which affect many people. So here, by just pure mistake, changing an organism, a life form, what we do, we call it making a knockout mouse, we basically hit on the master regulator which controls bone loss. And then a friend of mine working out of California and Los Angeles basically found the brother, and how the thing is all working is this one. So we basically found the osteoporosis genes, and how it's working is there's one protein, it's like a car. So there's one protein, it's like the gas pedal. You step on it, you eat bone away. So there's the second protein, which works like a brake, and if you step on it, you actually gain bone. And we have never found, which is really curious, we've never found a single thing which controls bone loss, which does not use these two proteins. And of course now, to give you some idea what it's doing is osteoporosis, old age bone loss, affects 300 million women. So the United States spends $50 billion a year to treat osteoporosis. In Canada, I'm told 90% of people who have home care are because they cannot get out of bed anymore because their bones are breaking in pieces. There are many other diseases of the bone. So every second person here in this audience will have arthritis. Some have it worse, some have it better. And what's happening is in very severe cases of arthritis, these bone-eating cells I showed you start actually melting away the joint space, and people will be crippled for life. And for example, and what we are doing actually is, what this break of the system is, it's the insulin for the bone. So all you actually need to do, if somebody breaks the bone, somebody has osteoporosis, or has disease like arthritis, what we do is we just put back the brake like insulin for a diabetic, and it shuts down bone loss. And we did this in animals and invent now in humans. And if we don't run into some side effects, so probably 3 shots a year should wipe out osteoporosis from this earth. So which is, of course, quite intriguing. But now it's getting interesting. So people, this is rheumatoid arthritis. It affects women. 1 in 50 women have this. Especially younger women get this. They were crippled for their life. They cannot pick up their kids anymore. They cannot drive their cars anymore. They cannot wear certain clothes anymore. And so we thought if the people get crippled, and you get crippling because the bone is lost, so when the bone is lost, of course, you cannot use your joints anymore. Maybe if we shut down these bone-eating cells with our magic protein, which is, in fact, is a hormone which is in all of us, in our bodies, which just circles around, just somebody who loses the bone has less of it. So what happens in arthritis? Can we shut down arthritis and crippling in arthritis? And we did this. And just to make the story short, so the left side is a normal joint, so this is this thing here. So in the middle, when we induce arthritis, you can see it's messed up. It's completely melted away. And on the right side is when we shut down the bone loss. And these animals in the middle, they're crippled. They cannot even stand on their feet anymore. So when we shut down the bone-eating cells, they're just jumping around the cages. So another disease we are particularly interested in, me being a good Canadian boy who cannot even skate, is Canadians like to play ice hockey, and so many of them lose their teeth, as you can see. So it's actually a serious problem because 10% of diabetics will all lose their teeth because they're very susceptible to infections. And so we thought teeth, old people lose their teeth, and the reason is because old people get osteoporosis, the teeth are encased in a bony matrix, and when the bone gets dissolved, you can just pull out teeth. So we thought maybe that's another thing, we just recreate periodontal disease, tooth loss, and then shut down these bone-eating cells. And this is how your normal tooth looks. So this is a healthy normal tooth. And this is when you have periodontal disease. So you can appreciate the difference. We can recreate things like this in animals. You can just pull out teeth from people. And this is how it looks when you shut down bone loss. It's completely normal. So meaning in 10 years, you might go to your dentist and actually have a bite on this protein to basically prevent tooth loss for people in the future. For bone loss, so of course, we are interested now going from knowing the gene, hitting on the osteoporosis genes, using this knowledge to shut down osteoporosis, crippling and arthritis, tooth loss, there are many other diseases. Kids with leukemias, they're little, they're tiny because their bones are melted away, so we can use this for the children. One thing which I found always curious, not being a real bone researcher, so being a genetic engineer, was why the hell is it that women get more bone loss, right? So why was evolution unfair to 50% of the population? And you see all these commercials on the television, you eat calcium, you drink milk, at the end of the day it doesn't do anything to you. So it does not really help, because the experiment of nature tells us after menopause, the sex hormones shut down, bone loss occurs. And so we wondered, why is it? Why do women have more bone loss? Because if you could play God or a creator, you would make a system like bone loss, like somebody who is running a lot, has lots of bone. So why would you control a system like bone? Why would you put it under the influence of sex hormones, hormones which control pregnancy? And so we got a very curious thing. This is actually, so I think it follows well to the sex talk. This is actually what turns us on as a scientist, so that's a breast. A little different vision of a breast, so we call it the mammary gland. And this white thing is actually a pregnant mammary gland, which makes milk. And turns out, when we mutate this gene, so our little tiny mice, actually all the pups are dying, all the offspring is dead, and the mothers cannot provide any milk. And we know sex hormones control milk production. So here we are, and what we basically know is the same protein. What evolution has done is it took the same protein to eat the bone away. And there's always the anecdote, every woman who has a kid loses a tooth, because what bone loss is doing is it sucks out the calcium from the bone. So the only place where mammals and kids get the calcium from is because they drink it via the milk of the mothers. So here we are. So we know now that what the real function of this protein is keep us alive as a species. Because if you mutate this gene, you will be all dead. Of course, the good notion is that every woman who is pregnant loses bone. However, it's completely reversible. So women with 10 pregnancies won't get more osteoporosis than a woman who has never been pregnant. So the system is set up to be completely reversible, meaning that even an 80-year-old woman who has severe osteoporosis, if we stick back these proteins, they should have completely normal bone again. So this is Archimboldo again. And I think what biology and all these genetic experiments really told us is that we cannot see things isolated. You actually have to create your nose. You work on your nose and figure out, my God, this nose is actually connected to your ear. And so finally, what we want to do is recreate or re-establish what life really is about. So one thing I'm really interested in is, so if you have a chance to see Gustav Klimt in Ottawa, so I'm interested in death. So that's a topic which intrigues me. Not just death as an ending of our life, but death which is important for creation. And for example, in our bodies, what is happening is, so for example, we are kind of an amorphic mass. And out of this amorphic mass, like an artist who chisels or Michelangelo chiseling out the David. So this is what happens to us when we're little embryos. So we're chiseled out of this mass, so a head forms, we get our noses, we get our fingers. And so this is, for example, fingers, but also not everybody believes it, but once we were frogs. And so we actually, when we're little embryos, we have these webs between our fingers. And all these cells which are dying, all these cells actually have to die. So we have our fingers, you can use them. Our cells, there are cells in front of our eyes as little embryos. So they're all dying so we can see, so you can see me. Our intestines are solid, so all the cells inside are dying. So they're opening up our reproductive organs. So when we're little embryos, we actually made as males and females. And so depending on the sex hormones we get, you become a male or a female, and the other tissues basically killed away. When a tadpole becomes a frog, the tails are dying. When a plant forms leaves of flowers, the cells are dying. So cell death, basically the shaping of life out of an amorphic mass, is absolutely essential to create life. And so I'm telling you because I think we hit on the master regulator of cell death in evolution. And that's the protein. So we cloned it. We found it 3 years ago with a friend of mine working out of Paris. And so we call it a cell death-inducing molecule. Other people call it the hand of God, because what it's doing is it takes the cell to die. And this is probably, we find this is a very ancient gene. You find it in tuberculosis bugs and slime molds and in yeast, so whatever you want. So that's the most ancient gene, we believe, which controls programmed cell death. And it sits inside of cell, and I won't go through it, but this is basically capture death of a cell in real time. And so you can see this when cells are dying. And when cells die, basically this hand of God goes into the cell and kills them. And when we mutate it, when we create now a new life form, mutating this gene, what is happening is we actually do not get life. Because when we are little embryos, cells need to die that our heads shape, that our hearts form. And when this cannot happen, we cannot even become a life form. So my point is cell death is actually creating life. And it's very intriguing. And many people work on these problems. So what are the genetic determinants of cell death? Because at the end of the day, if you bring everything to a very simple idea, what is cancer or disease or aging is because some cells are growing and other cells are dying. So for example, Alzheimer's disease is because too many of our brain cells are dying. Parkinson's disease, the same. Somebody gets skin cancer because every day on your skin, millions and millions of your skin cells are dying, and there are new ones growing. But so you can imagine if the cell cannot die anymore, what would happen is a huge tumor is growing out. So if we understand these basic principles of life, so our hope is basically to interfere at the basis of diseases like cancer and heart attacks. For example, if somebody has a heart attack, it's because you don't have blood flow to your heart anymore. And what happens is the cells in your heart are dying. And so if they're dying, you get scar tissue and you're in big trouble. And so this is what we try to change. Of course, so now we have these technologies and we're all guilty to creating it. Technologies to clone humans, to change lives. So I can take any hair of you here, put them into my cells, change the genes, and recreate yourself. So like we can use Einstein's brain if you want. Also, I think it's probably easier to use Disney. Here he's frozen somewhere. So that's much easier to use. So, but of course, technologies like this, and I think science has always been misused. And certainly we will create monsters. And for example, this whole thing changes how we perceive things. So what is our soul, for example? So what is religion? What is the moral? So yesterday I heard you can cut the brain into the half, and Spöri got the Nobel Prize because he could cut the soul into half, but actually you might ask, why did the Catholics not shout about embryonic cloning? And the reason is actually religious. And the reason is because the Jesuits believe that the soul is the real thing which cannot be cut into half. But biologically, as a little embryo, up to 2 weeks after conception, actually the embryo can be parted, so you have two identical twins, and therefore a life form can only have a soul after 2 weeks. So nobody of the church is actually saying things, because officially you could actually take stem cells and grow early embryos in tissue culture. And of course we have to redefine all these issues. The other issue is, which I find quite intriguing, is so who owns things? For example, in Iceland, there's a company set up which is basically selling genes from Icelanders because they're a highly inbred population, so they've lived there for thousands of years. And so they try to clone genes and find disease genes. And of course the same is true for some Aboriginal populations. So who owns what? And then of course this thing has created an enormous biotechnology revolution. So just as an example, the people who pay our work from the US, so they have only 2 products on the market, but there was $70 billion. So just a little company. So this thing is, of course, so you can imagine how much governments are probably interested in interfering with things like this, because you want to kill an industry which creates $500 billion a year. So I think these are really important issues we have to address. On the other hand, of course, so we have a brave new world in our hands. So we can recreate life. So we have finding things to wipe out osteoporosis in the future, using stem cells. And I think stem cells, just cloning humans, will be something what people did in the 20s. So you had the model in fairs, in city fairs. The Cold Spring Harbor laboratories in the US were set up actually as breeding exercises for humans. And so they actually displayed the perfect genetic human family in the 20s and the 30s in every city fair, I'm told, in the United States. And so people will do it, but I think it will have not any major impact beside moral question and religious question on real medicine. So what will have a major impact is that we have actually learned to take a cell from your skin and reprogram it to become a heart muscle cell. So in the future, what I will see and what we're actually doing now is reprogramming cells to basically create a new heart for somebody who had a heart attack. And so this is quite intriguing. For example, 2 months ago, the US Defense Department actually contacted me because they're pouring now billions of bucks into regenerative medicine with the dream some of the soldiers get shot and within 2 days they're completely healthy again. So these are the utopias I think we're actually facing and which we certainly will be able to do. And I think it's in science, this has become a real revolution. And I truly believe in the history of science and humankind, we have never had this potential to actually go in and change life just before it even happens. And it can be used for the good of it to wipe out major diseases which affect millions and millions of people, wipe out cancers, but of course it can also be used for the real bad things. And I think I heard John Turner today talking about Kennedy, and I think to paraphrase Kennedy is, I think he once said that in the final analysis, so we all live on this little planet called Earth, and we all breathe the same air, and what we all want is that the future of our kids is much better, and we're all mortal. And with this, thank you.